He pulled over a black man for looking suspicious, but what the officer didn't know was that the man he just insulted was the head of internal affairs. In just 5 minutes, this arrogant cop's entire career would come crashing down, and by the end of the night, he'd learn a lesson that would change his life forever. "Step out of the car now." Officer Greg Turner's voice sliced through the cool night air like a knife. The street was quiet, the kind of place where porch lights glowed warmly, and trimmed lawns told stories of comfort. But tonight, that calm was shattered by the flash of red and blue lights bouncing off every nearby window. Greg stood beside his patrol car, one hand on his holster, the other clutching a flashlight. His jaw was tight, eyes narrowed, heart thudding in that rhythm he secretly loved: power, control. In front of him sat a black Mercedes S-Class, engine humming softly. Behind the wheel was a man, mid-40s, dark-skinned, neatly dressed in a charcoal suit and silver tie. Calm, collected. The kind of man who didn't seem the least bit intimidated by flashing lights or authority. And that irritated Greg Turner. He hated that kind of calm, that quiet confidence. It challenged him. "License and registration," Greg barked, tapping the window twice with his flashlight. The man inside didn't move right away. Instead, he turned his head slowly, eyes meeting Greg's through the glass. The look wasn't defiant, it was measured, almost pitying. "Of course, officer," the man said evenly as he pressed the button, lowering his window halfway. His voice was smooth, deep, deliberate, educated. "May I ask what the problem is?" Greg scoffed. "Don't play smart with me. You were driving too slow through a nice neighborhood. People around here get nervous when what?" The man cut in softly, one eyebrow arching. "When someone like me drives a nice car?" The tone wasn't loud or angry, but it hit Greg like a punch. His flashlight wavered for half a second before he snapped. "Just hand me your ID before I have to pull you out myself." The man exhaled slowly, not out of fear, but patience. "Everything's in order," he said, reaching for his inside jacket pocket with 2 fingers, moving slowly and deliberately. "I don't want any misunderstandings." Greg watched his every movement like a hawk. His mind was already spinning. Nice car. Expensive watch. No fear. Probably some hotshot lawyer or CEO pretending he belongs here. The man pulled out a sleek leather wallet, the kind that looked custom-made. He opened it and extended a card and a badge toward Greg. "Here you go, officer." Greg snatched it without saying thanks and shone his flashlight over the ID. Name, Derek Hayes. Occupation, Deputy Director, Internal Affairs Division. Greg blinked. His expression froze for half a second. Then, instinctively, he forced a smirk. "Internal Affairs? Right. And I'm the president." The man didn't flinch. "You can call it in," he said calmly. "Your dispatch will confirm everything." But Greg didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone who looked like him. "I don't need to call it in," Greg said sharply. "Step out of the car. We'll talk outside." "I've done nothing wrong," Derek replied, still seated, still calm. "And, unless you have probable cause, you're violating your own department's policy." Greg leaned closer, his breath fogging the edge of the window. "I said step out. Don't make me repeat myself." Inside, Derek closed his eyes briefly. He'd seen this type of officer too many times before. The badge didn't make them brave, it made them reckless. With a slow motion, he unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door. The night air brushed against his suit as he stood, tall, dignified, unshaken. Greg expected fear, but there was none. The man looked straight at him, his gaze steady, and that infuriated Greg even more. "Hands on the hood," Greg snapped. "Officer Turner," Derek said, his tone now edged with quiet authority. "You're making a serious mistake." Greg stepped closer. "Do it. Now." Neighbors began peeking out through curtains. A woman across the street whispered to her husband, "What's going on out there?" The neighborhood dogs started barking. Derek placed his palms lightly on the hood, keeping his tone composed. "I'm warning you, officer. I'm not just another name on your traffic stop list. You'll regret this if you continue." Greg rolled his eyes. "Everyone says that. You think your fake badge will scare me?" "Fake." Derek turned his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. You think I'd risk impersonating internal affairs? Greg didn't answer. He reached for his radio, but his thumb hesitated on the button. Deep down, a whisper of doubt flickered. What if he's telling the truth? But pride drowned it out. He grabbed Derek's wrist roughly. We'll sort it out at the station. That's when Derek's tone changed, calm, but heavy, like a warning bell. You've just assaulted a federal officer, Greg Turner. Greg froze. What did you just say? I said, Derek repeated firmly, you've crossed a line that's going to cost you everything. The name, Greg Turner, echoed in Greg's ears. He hadn't told him that. How do you know my name? Greg asked, his voice cracking. Derek slowly turned around, his eyes glinting under the patrol lights. I know every name in this department, Officer Turner, especially the ones with 3 prior complaints for unnecessary use of force. Greg's hand dropped from his holster. That's not possible. It's very possible, Derek replied, straightening his tie. And now, I'll be adding one more report for tonight. Just then, another patrol car rolled up. Officer Maria Lopez stepped out, confusion on her face. Turner, she called out. What's happening here? Greg didn't answer. He just stood there, pale. Derek turned to her calmly. Officer Lopez, good evening. Please radio your supervisor and confirm my credentials. Lopez blinked. Wait, are you? Derek Hayes. Greg's eyes widened. You know him? Lopez's voice shook. Every officer knows that name. He's the head of internal affairs for the entire state. The silence that followed was crushing. The only sound was the static hum of the police radio. Greg looked down at the ID in his trembling hand, then back up at the man he had just grabbed. His arrogance drained away, replaced with something he hadn't felt in years, fear. Derek stepped closer, his voice low but firm. Next time you see someone like me in a car like this, remember, the badge doesn't give you power over people. It gives you the duty to protect them. Greg couldn't respond. His throat was dry, his face flushed with shame. Derek turned toward his car, opened the door, and paused. You'll be hearing from my office in the morning, he said simply. As the Mercedes pulled away, Greg's knees weakened. He looked at Lopez, who whispered, You really messed up this time. The red and blue lights faded into the distance, and with them, so did Greg Turner's career. The name on the ID read clearly under the flashlight beam, Derek Hayes. But what froze Greg's breath wasn't the name. It was the title printed right beneath it. Deputy Director, Internal Affairs Division. For a moment, Greg just stared. His mind stumbled over the words. Internal Affairs. The department that could end any cop's career with a single report. He blinked hard, hoping he'd misread it. What is this supposed to be? He said finally, his voice shaking slightly. A fake badge? Some kind of joke? The man's tone didn't waver. No, Officer Turner, he replied evenly. That's a real federal identification. I oversee investigations into police misconduct, including cases like what you're doing right now. Greg let out a short, forced laugh. Sure you are, he said, trying to sound confident. And I'm the mayor. The man, Derek, didn't even flinch. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply said, You can call it in if you'd like. Ask your dispatcher to confirm my credentials. The calmness in his voice was unnerving. Greg's fingers twitched over his radio, but he didn't move to pick it up. His pride, his ego, kept him frozen. The idea that this black man sitting in a luxury car could be someone above him. It burned inside like fire. No, Greg said finally, squaring his shoulders. Step out of the car, anyway. Let's make sure everything checks out. Derek's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't argue. He simply gave a quiet sigh, unbuckled his seatbelt, and opened the door. He stepped out with a quiet confidence of someone who didn't fear the badge in front of him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed sharply in a navy suit. His tie glinted faintly in the flashing lights. He didn't look like a man trying to prove something. He looked like someone who already knew exactly who he was. And that infuriated Greg Turner. The officer's flashlight beam moved up and down, scanning Derek's suit, his watch, his shoes, all expensive, all immaculate. Must be nice, Greg muttered under his breath. Derek caught it. Excuse me. Greg's jaw tightened. Hands on the hood, he ordered. Officer Turner, Derek said quietly, you don't want to do this. I'm giving you a chance to correct yourself before this goes any further. Now, Greg barked, louder this time, his hand tightening on his holster. Derek hesitated for a moment, then turned and placed his palms gently on the hood of his Mercedes. The engine still hummed softly beneath the metal, warmth spreading under his hands. Do you treat all citizens this way, Derek asked, or just the ones who look like me? Greg's face reddened. Keep talking, and you'll find yourself in cuffs, he snapped. Around them, the quiet neighborhood was waking up. Porch lights flicked on one by one. Curtains moved. A couple across the street whispered from their doorway. What's happening out there? A woman murmured. Greg's voice grew sharper. You think that fancy ID protects you from following the law? It doesn't have to, Derek replied, still calm. The law protects me. The same law you're supposed to uphold. That answer hit harder than a shout. Greg took a step closer, invading Derek's space, the beam of his flashlight grazing Derek's cheek. You think you can talk to me like that? Greg hissed. I'm not talking to you like that, Officer Turner, Derek said, finally turning his head just enough to meet his gaze. I'm reminding you who you swore to be. The words made Greg's chest tighten. He didn't like being reminded, didn't like being challenged. Turn around, Greg ordered. Hands behind your back. For what reason? Derek asked, his tone still controlled. What's the charge? Greg stammered. I said turn around. But this time, Derek didn't move. He straightened slowly, his full height casting a shadow across Greg. The flashing lights painted streaks of red and blue across his face, but his expression was calm, almost pitying. You're angry because you feel small, Derek said quietly. Because tonight, your authority isn't enough. Greg's nostrils flared. Don't psychoanalyze me, Mr. Big Shot. Then do your job, Derek replied. Or call it in, like I suggested. Greg's voice cracked slightly. I don't need to call it in. Because you're afraid of what they'll say, Derek countered. That made Greg snap. He grabbed Derek's arm roughly. I said you're under investigation until I know who you really are. Derek didn't resist, but his voice grew firm, almost like a judge delivering a sentence. You're making a serious mistake, officer. Yeah? We'll see about that. Greg pulled harder, but Derek's words cut through the tension like thunder. I'm documenting this interaction, Derek said clearly. Body cameras or not, your aggression is being noted right now. Greg froze for half a second, looking around nervously. He hadn't realized the small blinking red light on Derek's lapel. A camera. You recording me? Greg snapped. Internal affairs always records, Derek replied evenly. Transparency goes both ways. For the first time, Greg's mask cracked. His hand trembled slightly. He looked around, at the neighbors, the blinking camera, the calm man who seemed completely in control of a situation that should have belonged to him. Then, the worst sound Greg could imagine broke the silence. Another patrol siren. A second police car pulled up. Officer Maria Lopez stepped out, eyes wide as she saw the scene. Derek standing tall beside the hood, Greg gripping his arm like a rookie. Turner, she called cautiously. What's going on? Got this guy claiming to be internal affairs, Greg said quickly. Trying to intimidate me. Derek didn't move. He simply turned his head toward her and said, Officer Lopez. Good evening. Would you mind confirming my credentials? My badge should be in your system. Lopez blinked, frowning. Wait. Derek Hayes. Greg turned sharply. You know this guy? Lopez's voice dropped. Every cop knows that name. He's the Deputy Director of Internal Affairs for the entire state. The air went still. Greg felt his stomach drop. Lopez's radio crackled softly. Dispatch confirms. The voice on the other end said. That's Deputy Director Hayes. Repeat, do not detain. Cooperate fully. Greg's grip loosened instantly. He stepped back, pale as the moonlight. Derek turned fully toward him, fixing his jacket, adjusting his tie. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and calm, but every word landed like a verdict. Officer Turner, he said, tonight wasn't just a mistake. It was a mirror. Now you get to see who you really are when you think no one's watching. Greg's mouth opened, but no words came out. Derek leaned in slightly. "And for the record," he added, "I was watching long before tonight." Then he turned, stepped into his car, and drove away, leaving behind flashing lights, stunned silence, and one officer whose career had just begun to unravel. Minutes later, 2 more patrol cars rolled up, their sirens cutting through the heavy silence before dying down to a steady blink of red and blue. The quiet street now looked like a scene from a crime drama. Curious neighbors whispering behind curtains, dogs barking in the distance, and tension hanging thick in the night air. Officer Greg Turner stood stiffly beside his patrol car, sweat glistening on his forehead. In front of him, Derek Hayes remained still and composed, the picture of calm authority, while the lights from 3 squad cars painted streaks of color across his navy suit. One of the younger officers, Maria Lopez, jumped out of her cruiser and hurried forward, her hand instinctively resting on her holstered weapon. "Greg, what's going on?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. Greg pointed toward Derek with a tilt of his chin. "Got this guy driving suspiciously," he said. "Claims he's from internal affairs." His words came out fast, defensive, a little too confident, as if he was trying to convince himself more than her. Lopez frowned. "Internal affairs?" "Yeah," Greg said, forcing a smirk. "Pulled him over for acting shady. He flashes some kind of badge. Says he's the deputy director or something. Thought I'd better call backup." Derek didn't say a word. He stood quietly, hands folded in front of him, expression unreadable, like a man who'd already seen how this story ends. Lopez stepped closer, the beam from her flashlight landing on the badge in Greg's hand. Her eyes widened. "Greg," she whispered. "What?" he snapped, impatient. Her voice dropped lower, almost trembling. "That's real. That badge is real." Greg blinked. "What are you talking about?" "I've seen that name before," Lopez said. "Derek Hayes. He's not just from internal affairs. He's the deputy director, the head of the entire state's IA division." The words hit Greg like a punch to the chest. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked from Lopez to Derek, then back again. That's impossible." Derek finally spoke, his tone low and steady, but filled with quiet authority. "Officer Lopez," he said, "please radio your supervisor and confirm. I'll wait." Lopez hesitated only for a moment, then grabbed her shoulder mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 2211. Can you confirm an identification for Deputy Director Derek Hayes, Internal Affairs Division?" A few tense seconds passed. The only sound was static. Then, "Affirmative. Mr. Derek Hayes is the head of Internal Affairs. He's authorized at the state and federal level." The words echoed through every radio in the area. Silence fell instantly. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. Greg's hand dropped to his side. His flashlight dimmed against the ground as if ashamed of its own light. Officer Lopez looked between them, her throat tight. "Oh my God," she murmured. Greg's face went pale. His heart pounded, so hard it felt like it might break through his chest. He'd just manhandled internal affairs. Not just a random official. The man who oversaw every complaint, every misconduct report, every disciplinary hearing in the entire state. He swallowed hard. "Sir, I..." Derek raised a hand, stopping him cold. "Don't," Derek said softly. "Not yet." He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Greg's. The authority in his gaze was overwhelming, calm, confident, and impossible to argue with. "Now, Officer Turner," he said, each word deliberate and controlled. "Care to explain why you pulled me over?" Greg stammered, words tumbling over themselves. I thought you were driving suspiciously. You slowed down through the neighborhood. I just wanted to make sure." "To make sure what?" Derek interrupted, his voice quiet but piercing. Greg froze. "To make sure I wasn't out of place." Derek continued, "That someone who looks like me couldn't possibly live here, couldn't possibly drive this kind of car?" Greg shook his head quickly. No, that's not what I meant." Derek tilted his head. "Then tell me, what did you mean?" The silence after that question was deafening. The other officers stood frozen. Lopez looked down, ashamed. The 2 rookies beside her exchanged uneasy glances. Everyone could see what had happened. Everyone could feel it. Greg's throat went dry. Sir, I made a mistake. Derek's expression didn't change. You didn't just make a mistake, Officer Turner. You made a decision. A choice. You saw my skin color, my car, my clothes, and decided I didn't belong here. Greg's lips trembled. I didn't mean any disrespect, sir. You grabbed me, Derek cut in. You shouted at me. You humiliated me in front of an entire neighborhood. That's not a misunderstanding. That's misconduct. Greg's chest rose and fell in panic. Sweat trickled down his temple. Please, sir, if you file a report. Derek's voice was sharp now. If I file a report? Officer Turner, I am the report. The words struck like thunder. He stepped closer, not in anger, but with the authority of a man used to commanding rooms full of people. You know what I do, Officer Turner? I investigate behavior like this, and I make sure men like you are held accountable for what you do behind those badges. Greg opened his mouth to plead, but Derek's voice rose just slightly, enough to silence him. Do you have any idea how many complaints I've read from people just like the ones you've stopped before? Derek asked. How many voices are ignored because they didn't have a badge or a title to protect them? The younger officers couldn't meet his eyes. Lopez's shoulders sank lower. Derek took a deep breath. His tone softened, not out of forgiveness, but clarity. You wear that uniform, he said quietly, and people trust you with their lives. But tonight, you didn't serve or protect anyone. You just proved every reason why people fear the ones who are supposed to protect them. Greg's eyes welled up. Please, sir. I've got a family. Derek nodded slightly. Then you should understand what it feels like when someone's father, brother, or son gets treated the way you treated me tonight. He turned to Lopez. Officer Lopez, I'll be expecting your body cam footage first thing in the morning. And your written statement. Lopez nodded, her voice trembling. Yes, sir. Then Derek faced Greg one last time. You'll be hearing from my office within 48 hours, he said calmly. For now, hand over your weapon and badge to your superior officer. Greg's eyes widened. Please, sir. Do it. His voice carried no anger, just finality. Greg's hands shook as he unbuckled his holster and unclipped the badge from his chest. He handed them to Lopez, who avoided his eyes. Derek took one last look at the man who'd stopped him, then turned to his car. He paused before opening the door. Officer Turner, he said without turning around. Power isn't about who you can control. It's about who you choose to respect. And with that, he got into his car, started the engine, and drove off into the night, leaving behind flashing lights, stunned silence, and a man who had just realized the cost of his own arrogance. Greg stammered, his face pale under the harsh glow of the patrol lights. I thought you were acting suspicious. Just doing my job. Derek's calm, but cold stare cut through him like glass. No, Officer Turner. You weren't doing your job. You were profiling. You saw a black man in a nice car and assumed he didn't belong here. Greg opened his mouth, fumbling for words. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. Derek's voice was firm, every word deliberate. You just didn't expect consequences. The other officers stood in uneasy silence. The tension in the air was suffocating. Officer Lopez looked down, pretending to check her radio, while one of the others shifted nervously from foot to foot. Greg's throat went dry. His heart hammered. Sir, please. I made a mistake. Derek took a slow breath and stepped closer, his tone steady but cold. You didn't just make a mistake, Officer Turner. You made a series of choices rooted in arrogance and prejudice. You put your hands on me without probable cause. You disrespected identification that clearly outranked you. And worst of all, you let bias control your actions. Greg's jaw trembled. He could feel the weight of his career hanging by a thread. I swear I wasn't trying to. Enough, Derek said quietly, but the authority in his voice silenced everyone. Do you know how many reports cross my desk every week? How many complaints are filed against officers who claim they were just doing their job? No one moved. Derek's eyes locked onto Greg's. You've been on the force 9 years, correct? Greg nodded slowly. And in those 9 years, Derek continued, You've had 3 previous complaints filed against you, all from people of color. Aggressive stops, unnecessary force, verbal harassment. Ring a bell. Greg's eyes widened. You've looked into me before? Derek nodded. I look into everyone. Every officer in this state. Your name wasn't at the top of the list until tonight. The silence that followed was brutal. The flashing lights made Greg's face flicker between blue and red. Guilt and fear painted across his skin. Derek stepped even closer, his calm tone now edged with disappointment rather than anger. I've spent my career defending good cops, Officer Turner. Men and women who risk their lives to protect others. But I've also spent it holding bad ones accountable. And do you know the difference between the two? Greg didn't answer. Derek's voice dropped lower. Good cops have courage, not just to chase criminals, but to confront their own biases. Bad cops hide behind the badge. Greg's lips trembled. Please, sir. I've got a family. Kids at home. I can't lose my job. Derek looked away for a moment, staring at the quiet houses nearby. Curtains were drawn back slightly, neighbors peeking through, watching everything unfold. He could see the reflection of fear in their windows. Fear that had been planted by officers like Greg for years. When Derek turned back, his expression softened, but his words were still sharp. Then maybe you should have remembered that every person you pull over has a family too. Every one of them has someone waiting at home, wondering if they'll make it back alive. Greg's eyes filled with tears. I never meant to hurt anyone. Intent doesn't erase impact, Derek replied firmly. It doesn't undo humiliation. It doesn't calm the fear people feel when they see those flashing lights, because of moments exactly like this. Lopez took a hesitant step forward. Sir, what happens now? Derek turned to her. I'll be filing a full report. Until further notice, Officer Turner is suspended pending review. Her face fell, but she nodded. Understood. Greg's breathing grew uneven. Suspended? Sir, please. I can explain. You already did, Derek interrupted. Every word out of your mouth tonight explained exactly who you are when no one's watching. Greg's shoulders slumped. He could feel years of confidence crumble away in seconds. The authority he once wielded with pride now felt hollow, meaningless. Lopez radioed dispatch quietly. The night was filled with static and murmured codes, but to Greg, it all blurred into white noise. The world felt distant, fading, as the realization sank in. This wasn't just a bad night. This was the end of everything he'd built. Derek looked at him one last time. I don't hate you, Officer Turner. I don't even dislike you. But I do hate what you represent, the kind of policing that tears communities apart instead of protecting them. Greg's lip quivered. What happens after this? That's not up to me, Derek said. It's up to the department, the review board, and your own conscience. I hope, for your family's sake, that you take this as a chance to change. He turned to leave, adjusting his jacket as he walked toward his car. But then he paused and glanced back. One more thing, Derek said quietly. Next time you pull someone over, look at the person, not the color. Greg couldn't speak. His throat felt tight and his eyes stung. For the first time in his career, he felt what others had felt standing on the other side of the badge, powerless. Derek got into his car. The engine purred to life. The flashing lights reflected off the polished black surface as he rolled down the window. Officer Lopez, Derek said, his tone softer now. Make sure your report includes everything that happened here. No edits. No omissions. Yes, sir, Lopez replied quickly. I'll make sure it's accurate. Greg watched as Derek drove off into the night, the taillights fading into the darkness. For a moment, everything was silent. No radios, no talking, just the hum of the street lamp overhead. Lopez looked at Greg sadly. You should go home, Greg. They'll be in touch tomorrow. He nodded weakly, unable to speak. His badge suddenly felt heavier than ever before. As he stood there, watching Derek's car disappear, a single thought echoed in his mind, one that would haunt him for the rest of his life. What if it had been me on the other side? And for the first time, Officer Greg Turner understood what true accountability felt like. A week later, headlines swept across the city like wildfire. Officer suspended after wrongfully detaining state official. The article was short but explosive. Local TV stations picked up. News anchors replayed the dashcam footage, showing the moment Officer Greg Turner pulled over Derek Hayes, the Deputy Director of Internal Affairs. Viewers saw how Greg had spoken, how he'd grabbed Derek's arm, how the situation had escalated. By the next morning, the story had gone national. On talk shows and social media, everyone had an opinion. Some condemned Greg. Others defended him. But one truth became undeniable. The system had been forced to look in the mirror. Greg Turner was placed under investigation and, within weeks, dismissed from the force. The department released a statement. We do not tolerate discrimination or abuse of authority in any form. Effective immediately, all precincts across the state will undergo mandatory racial sensitivity and bias training. To the public, it was a victory. But inside Greg's small house on the edge of town, it didn't feel that way. He sat alone at his kitchen table one night, the newspaper spread before him, his name printed in bold black letters. His photo, the one from his officer profile, now plastered under the words suspended and misconduct. His wife stood in the doorway, arms crossed, quiet. What happens now? She asked softly. Greg didn't look up. I don't know, he said. I just don't know. The silence stretched. His son, only 8 years old, peeked around the corner. Dad, are you in trouble? Greg forced a weak smile. No, buddy. Daddy just made a mistake. But when his son went back to bed, Greg buried his face in his hands. The uniform he once wore with pride now hung lifeless in the closet. Every pin, every patch, felt like a lie. Meanwhile, Derek Hayes became a national figure overnight. But he didn't want fame. He wanted change. When the media pressed him for an angry statement, he refused. Instead, at a small press conference held in front of the state police headquarters, he stood behind a simple podium, wearing a gray suit and a calm expression. Cameras flashed, microphones pointed toward him. Reporters whispered. Derek spoke softly, but every word hit like a hammer. Justice isn't about power, he said. It's about respect for the law and for one another. If an officer can't see the humanity in someone because of their skin color, then they don't deserve to wear the badge. For a brief moment, the room fell silent. Then, applause erupted. His words went viral within hours. Clips of his speech spread across social media, stitched into montages of police reform, empathy, and accountability. People called him the calm storm, a man who didn't yell, didn't curse, but still made the world listen. Community leaders invited him to schools and precincts to speak about equality and policing with empathy. Even officers who once rolled their eyes at training programs began to see things differently after hearing him speak. But not everyone forgot Greg Turner. In the comments and news threads, some called him a monster. Others said he was just a man who made a mistake. Derek never once mentioned his name publicly again. But privately, he never stopped thinking about him. Months passed. Greg had found work as a security guard at a local grocery store. The uniform was different, cheaper fabric, no badge, no gun, but it still made him straighten his posture each morning, out of habit. Every time a police cruiser passed by, his stomach tightened. He missed the brotherhood, the sense of belonging, but he also knew he hadn't truly earned it. Some nights, he replayed that moment in his mind. The flashlight hitting Derek's calm face, the words you just didn't expect consequences. They echoed like a lesson he couldn't escape. He had lost his job, his reputation, his pride. But in that loss, something unexpected had begun to grow, self-awareness. He started reading books about racial bias, about social psychology, about the very prejudice he once denied existed. He watched Derek's interviews online, sometimes pausing mid-sentence, absorbing every word like it was a personal sermon. And then, one sunny afternoon, months later, fate brought them face to face again. A community outreach event was being held downtown, a program for police reform and youth mentorship. Greg wasn't planning to go. But when his old colleague Lopez texted him, saying Derek would be speaking, something inside him said he needed to. The park was buzzing with people, kids in blue future officers' shirts, families from different neighborhoods, volunteers handing out food. Greg stood at the back, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, unsure if he even belonged there. Then he saw him. Derek Hayes, standing under a white tent, surrounded by young recruits. He wasn't giving a speech this time. He was laughing, shaking hands, showing a group of teens how to properly approach a driver during a traffic stop. His demeanor was humble, fatherly. Every person around him seemed drawn in by his calm energy. Greg hesitated, then slowly walked forward. When Derek finally noticed him, he didn't frown. He didn't turn away. He simply gave a small nod. Greg stopped a few feet away. "Sir, I just wanted to say thank you," he said quietly, "for not ruining my life when you could have." Derek studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "I didn't want to ruin it, Officer Turner. I wanted to change it." Greg blinked, his throat tightening. "You did," he whispered. "You really did." Derek patted his shoulder once, firmly, then walked toward the next group of recruits. Greg stood there, frozen, watching as Derek spoke to the next generation of officers. His words soft but strong, his message clear. Behind him, a small banner flapped in the wind. It read, "Building a better blue, one officer at a time." Greg looked up at it and smiled faintly. For the first time in years, the word blue didn't feel like a color of fear or guilt. It felt like something that could still stand for hope. He walked away slowly, the sunset painting the sky gold behind him. He wasn't a police officer anymore. But maybe, just maybe, he could still be a better man. And somewhere in the crowd, Derek glanced back briefly, watching Greg disappear into the distance, a quiet smile on his face. Because sometimes, justice isn't about punishment. It's about awakening. And in that quiet moment, both men finally understood that change doesn't start with laws or badges. It starts in the heart. In the end, it wasn't punishment that changed him, it was perspective. One man used his power to humble, and another used his failure to grow. Because justice isn't about who wears the badge, it's about who has the heart to see what's right, even when it hurts.